Hey y'all, welcome to the Team LocoFit Roundtable, hosted by me, Laurin Conlon, owner of Team LocoFit. Each week, I am joined by one of our coaches to dive headfirst into the nutrition, training, mindset, and coaching strategies we use with our clients. If you loved the show, please subscribe, leave us a review, tell a friend. You know the drill. And for more information about coaching, the programs we offer, and additional content, visit teamlocofit.com. All right, and we are back with Dr. Bill Campbell once again. Thank you so much for coming on a second time, Campbell.
Yes, thank you for having me.
And if you hadn't listened to the last episode that came out on Monday, definitely check that out. We go over all the ins and outs of body fat testing, understanding different methods, how to get predictable results, what body fat testing actually can mean for you. But this episode, I really wanted to focus on a case study that came out of the lab like a year ago or so.
No, we published this in March. March of this year.
Okay, so very recent. I meant like we did it last year. Anyways, doesn't matter.
Oh, yes.
Newer study that came out. It was a smaller study, but it looked at a really, really interesting question, and or really a series of questions. Tracking people post-competition, what happens as far as their metabolic and hormonal recovery, as well as just kind of body fat and body composition changes. So first, I wanted to explain the novelty of this design. So there are only 7 participants in the study, but with this population, right, taking competitive athletes who are about to step on stage and then what they're doing afterwards, it's incredibly hard to get large-scale studies done on this population. And why? Anybody who's a competitor or have ever wanted to compete, it would be very hard to, unless you knew that a team of like well-respected competition coaches was running the study, right? And giving you the changes, it would be really hard to just go into a study and be like, yeah, just take over my diet, right? And the way that science works also is you need to make things as consistent as possible. So if people are coming in and they're doing different types of diets and different, diet compositions and different training, different cardio and all this stuff, it's kind of just better to follow them, and see what they're actually doing. So that's what this study did. It looked at competitors 1 to 2 weeks before their competition, 4 weeks after, and then about 8 to 10 weeks after. So there was no intervention here. It was simply just following the participants. And this is actually going to give us a better idea of what happens with people in the situation. So would you agree that this is probably a better model for physique competitors who don't necessarily want a scientist to take over their prep?
Yeah, I think it's the only way you're going to see a study with 7 subjects in it. And we call this a case series study. It was basically 7 individual case studies, but because we did all the measurements at the same time relative to their shows, it was a case series study. And I need to say one more thing. James Longstrom was my master's student at the time. He designed this study. He coordinated the study. So everything about what we're going to talk about is because of James Longstrom. This was his brainchild. And I mean, I helped with, some of the logistics and stuff. And he probably, I think he may have talked to you. He got a lot of advice from some of the top people in the profession in designing this and answering questions. So kudos to him for pulling this off.
Yeah, no, it's an awesome study. And I just wanted to really highlight that novelty of this, because a lot of people, will look at research and there's either 2 groups, right? People will say, look, this study came out and these were the results. And it's okay, but these were, overweight or obese men who've never trained before, right? So why are we going to extrapolate this to a female who is at a normal body composition, who's been trained for 2 years, right? You can look at it as potentially trends, but it's going to be very different. But then likewise, there's also people who look at research and go, well, that doesn't apply to me because they are not doing what I'm doing. And they kind of hold this perspective that oh, well, it wouldn't be run how I would do it, right? So you get 2 extreme ends with science. So it's hey, this is actually really cool. We're just following people who are in this very extreme subcategory of individuals. And in those extremes, the things that we're going to talk about now, the markers, are just more highlighted, right? A regular diet, with an average calorie deficit, you're going to see changes, but you're not going to see these extreme lows or these extreme rebounds either, because it's just, body fat mediated. So some of the markers that they went over, and then we'll discuss some of the results. So you looked at body fat, which you did just the normal markers, right? Ultrasound and calipers.
Yeah. Actually, in this study, we published the caliper data.
Okay.
We did ultrasound as well, but we decided to publish the skin fold calipers because competitors can get this done.
Yeah.
And this could apply to. Now the reality is it's close. The calipers and ultrasound are nearly identical, always within 1% of each other. But this was actually skin fold calipers.
Okay. So skin folds, we're looking at body fat. Of course, body fat percentage. Total body water, which we discussed in the last podcast, is super important to understanding lean body mass loss or gain. Also looked at RMR, so that would be resting metabolic rate. And just a quick summary, just for people who don't know, what would basically an RMR number equate to?
So an RMR stands for resting metabolic rate. It's the number of calories you burn per day to keep you alive. So it's like your base calories. So if you were going to lay in bed all day, how many calories would you burn? That's essentially what that's implying.
Yeah. And then there was two psychological measures. One was sleep quality and one was quality of life, just in general, because those are both important things, particularly with dieting. Looked at menstrual irregularities for the females in the study, knee extension performance. So do you want to kind of explain that quickly for people, like why you would test that?
Yeah, so we just wanted to look at, obviously, we tested them at what we thought was their lowest body fat percentage. So either peak week or the week prior. And we were looking at them 4 weeks, but really let's focus on the 8-week data when they were more fully recovered. Did their performance improve? And we measured their performance with a leg extension test.
Mm-hmm. And then, which is very common for, looking at strength. And obviously you could use a compound exercise, but that's going to be a little bit riskier. That's going to need some more coaching. Everybody's going to come with different backgrounds. If they don't know how to squat, it might be very variable. Whereas, hey, a knee extension is going to be very easy for any person to do, especially a person in a very depleted state. There were several blood draws. There was T3, T4, and leptin. So thyroid hormone, as well as leptin, which is the hunger hormone. Satiety hormone. Whew. All right. I'm hungry, so I'm thinking about that. So leptin is basically going to regulate your satiety. It's actually stored in your body fat levels, which is why this is so important to look at. So it's very body fat mediated. And then lastly, they did track their macros and their total calories. Was that the entire 8 weeks you got all the data, or just like the week they were coming in?
When phrase that again.
So there was 3 time points for the testing. Was it just a recall of that week, or was it like the entire time that, like, from start to finish, you had every day's worth of calories?
We had all of that data.
Okay, cool. So you got to see pretty much all of the, hey, this is the lowest of the low, and then presumably 8 to 10 weeks post diet, things are going to be a lot higher. And again, there was no intervention here, so there was no prescribed plan for the individuals. So it wasn't like, hey, you need to be doing X. It was just like, we want to see simply what you do. And that's actually what we did with my study too, was for the post-diet period, was like, for the next 10 weeks, do whatever you want, but like, just come back for testing. And part of that reason was I just wanted to simply see what people would do, because the post-diet period is what is so variable with individuals. If you're in a calorie deficit, of course, there's always nuance here, but for most people, you're going to lose weight. Afterwards is really the interesting part with how people handle it and kind of what they gravitate towards. So those were the markers. And like I mentioned, it was, pre-show, like you said, the kind of the lowest presumable point for them, 4 weeks post, and then 8 to 10 weeks post. So what were some of the results that you guys saw from this?
So the biggest thing is what you would expect. Everybody gained weight. And by the way, out of these case studies, so I think of this as 7 individual case studies. Some were doing their first time shows, and some were highly experienced competitors. Some of them were coaches in their profession. So with body weight, we saw somebody gain a lot of body fat and body weight, and we saw other people who didn't really gain much, which is what you just said. It's that period that's highly variable. And you know that because you're in the trenches, you're a professional in the field. But now we actually have some data to say, hey, look how variable this is. Now, based on my recollection of the subjects, the ones who did not have a lot of experience in competing gained the most weight. And almost everybody was a was a veteran competitor, so they've done, this was not their first show. And in those people, the weight gain was a little less than 10% of their weight back by the 8-week mark.
Okay. So yeah, so as expected, body fat goes up, RMR goes up, sleep quality improved, quality of life improved, right? People are eating more. Of course, that could be very variable because, looking at the long-term changes between people who are, heavily competing, who then tie their happiness to competing, that would be interesting. But of course, probably never really be able to figure that out on a psych test on a larger level, besides maybe some more case studies. And, strength is going to go, all these things are going to change, right? The one interesting thing was, I think a lot of people talk about leptin as something that is really influential on a kind of a day-to-day or week-to-week basis, right? And, for a while, the idea was if you have a carbohydrate refeed, your leptin is going to be restored, and that's going to be beneficial to stopping some of these metabolic adaptations. And I would probably argue that it's really just more body fat mediated. Like, sure, a refeed might help on a very small level, but as like a total impact, your leptin is still going to be lower, and you're still probably going to not have much satiety if you're at a low body fat. Would you agree with that, or do you think it is more mediated by something else?
Well, I'll say what I know, where I think a lot of the thought, the opinions have based on leptin and carbohydrate refeeds. So there was a study in non-dieting females where they overfed them for 3 days on a high carbohydrate diet, and they had a significant increase in leptin levels. And then, like everybody, you say, oh, this will help bodybuilders. Well, bodybuilders are dieting. They're lean. Like, it was a very different population.
Yes.
So one, we don't know what would happen in bodybuilders that are in a caloric deficit, and then for 2 days they increase, or 3 days they increase carbs. Now, we did a refeed study where we did increase carbs for 2 days every weekend, but we didn't measure leptin acutely. So we didn't measure it on Friday and then again on Monday after the high carb. We measured it before and after the study, which really didn't tell us much other than what you said. Yeah, you lose fat, your leptin goes down. You gain fat, your leptin goes up, which is what we saw in this study. So anybody saying that carbohydrate refeeds improve leptin acutely, they're not basing that on the evidence. If they're saying that based on anything, it would be their experience with clients that are giving them that blood work and that feedback. But I'm not aware of any data in a physique athlete population to suggest that.
Yeah, and again, a transient level, right, of leptin, right? You might feel slightly more satiated at the end of the day. That could just be due to the calories, right, and obviously the carbohydrates. But long term, I don't think that really makes a difference. And once you've gotten to a certain body fat level, doesn't matter how many refeeds you have, you're still going to be hungry. That's
Right.
just the way that it works. And the farther you are from your set point, the more. And that would be something that I would love to do, kind of like a case series on, because it would be really hard to do like an actual study on this. But doing something where, looking at people who kind of sit naturally leaner, looking at their dieting adaptations versus people who sit a little bit heavier and still get down there. But what I noticed the biggest difference is, the people who, like myself, sit a little bit heavier, who can get lean, but it's fighting tooth and nail to get down there, versus people who sit, leaner, their dieting experience, like how different is that on all those levels, metabolic wise, recovery wise, hormonal wise, like all the things during and after, because that really is the biggest thing in practice that I see, is these adaptations affect everybody very differently based on, a lot of where their kind of genetic disposition to settle at is. The people who are naturally leaner, yeah, they can get a lot leaner easier with less adaptations, you know what I mean? Less cardio, they can have more refeeds. And the other people are going to need a 7-month diet, and they're going to be pretty aggressive, and they're going to need to take 2 years off afterwards, right? So it's really hard because, like we talked about in the body fat podcast, you could look at somebody at 15% body fat, and they look very different, right? Same thing, you could look at somebody at the end of their contest prep, and then how they actually recover and what they have to do to recover is going to be vastly different just based on their own body and their own genetics. Not even just what their prep look like, but just where their body kind of sits.
Yeah, and while we're talking about leptin, we had 7 people that we followed. All 7 gained fat. All 7 gained weight 8 weeks later. But 2 of these subjects did not increase leptin. So we always assume, well, you gain fat, you're going to gain leptin. And that's generally true, but not in 2 people. 2 out of 7 did not. So there are always exceptions to the rule. And in both cases with the leptin, they happen to be in males. And in all the female, I'm just looking at my data.
Really? Huh. Okay. I was wondering if it was a diet history correlation. Sometimes, leptin can change over time with somebody's diet history, especially if somebody had an eating disorder like, anorexia, that is going to specifically alter their leptin levels. So I was thinking, oh, this must have been females with a long diet history, but that's actually really interesting that it was the males.
Yes, in this case.
But, and again, that's 7 people, can we extrapolate that to everybody? Of course not. But you can see the wide variation here and the wide variability just amongst 7 people. So it really opened, I think, everybody's eyes who's going to be reading this to, wow, like what I'm going through maybe is not so crazy, right? Like everybody's going to have a very different situation post diet. The one thing's for sure, if you've done a bodybuilding competition, you need to gain body weight and body fat afterwards. Most things will be restored, but how long it takes for them to be restored is going to be very different. I know some people who their, 8 to 10 weeks is simply just like getting back to like semblance of like normalcy, right? Like they're not even really recovered at that point. So their hormones might still be down. Other people might have literally had barely any hormonal irregularities leading up to their entire contest, so that's another thing that's really variable, particularly amongst women, and you can't use that as the benchmark. And I see people trying to say that on both sides, and it's pretty damaging, right? Like you'll hear people say like, well, if you didn't lose your period, like you didn't get lean enough, and then you have other people saying like, if you lose your period, like you're killing yourself. And it's like, okay, there is a middle ground, right? And I've worked with clients who they're not even near competition level leanness, but dipping below any certain body fat level combined with other life things can throw off their cycle. I've had other people who are stage lean, like very, very low body fat percentage, who maintain a regular cycle. So you can't say that one is better than the other. It's just going to be based on that individual. Of course, keeping it as long as possible and getting it back as quickly as possible is the goal. But everybody's body is going to be very different. So what's another thing that you would have now kind of looking back and, all the stuff that you do know about, post-competition and recovery, particularly for physique athletes, something else that you would have wanted to look at during this case study or potentially just future studies in general?
Another blood marker, cortisol. I would have expected cortisol to be elevated at their leanest when their caloric deficit is at its highest. And again, I don't know that because we didn't measure it. But if that's true, then would have we seen a recovery in cortisol? So if we were going to do the study again, that is something we would look at. And then I would also like to look at blood glucose levels, like what happened with that, with this weight gain in the 8 weeks post. So that would probably be the second thing. Other than those two, I'm very simple. I like looking at body composition and metabolism. I love the psychological tests we did. As you know, I'm a big fan of those. And
I was like, I would add another one of those, but
but yeah,
but that's
cortisol, I would like, and as you know, but probably most people don't, as soon as you start looking at blood work, the cost of these studies starts to explode. We can do ultrasounds all day, metabolic rate, maybe couple hundred, maybe a couple $1,000, not even a couple thousand. You have to buy oxygen tanks and ultrasound gel. But blood work, you're looking at maybe $50 to $100 per test per subject, and these were 3 tests. So you're looking maybe $200 per subject or more just for one blood variable.
Yeah, it gets very, very pricey. And I know some people like saliva, and there are some tests that people do that. Didn't work out for me and you for my study, but
Now, and that was, we tested leptin, didn't we?
Salivary leptin, yeah, is not the same as salivary cortisol.
No.
But they'll sell you that kit for $2,000 if you guys want it.
Yeah, we just got, most of our tests came back as undetectable. Like it was
still salty about that. It's hard to get, the right amount of spit, and especially when people come in and they haven't had any food or water, like they're just trying to dribble over it and you don't know what else got in it. Like it's very messy.
Let's also say this: how many lean people are getting their leptin tested? That's usually an obese measure. So you're having people that are already lean going on a diet, getting leaner, and leptin levels. So maybe it's not surprising. But yeah, in your study, which we didn't publish yet, we could not even, we didn't even report on the leptin.
No, there was literally no.
Probably over 60% was undetectable levels in the saliva. But cortisol is a known it's been validated for a long time. It's probably the best salivary marker that I'm aware of.
Yes. You can also get it, with your blood work too. So if somebody is going to run a study, they can do that as well. But yeah, I would agree. Definitely cortisol would be interesting to see. Blood glucose and insulin, fasted insulin would be interesting to see.
Oh, insulin,
yeah, just I like seeing both of those kind of hand in hand. And then because fasted blood glucose is so variable. And then I would like to see something with like eating behaviors as far as like, the kind of like psych measurements go, and, relationship with food, because that is the most variable thing, right? There's people who you would think, oh, they're getting fed more, so they're immediately going to feel better. Not necessarily. If somebody has some kind of underlying disorder there, or they just have, they've competed for a long time and there's just a lot going on mentally, you might see it go the other direction. So it would just be something interesting to see. Obviously the three-factor eating questionnaire is something that I love. I used a lot of psych research within the food group, within the food psychology kind of uses that. But, even if you had like a Likert scale that you created, you know what I mean? So maybe it's not as validated, but you could be like, how is your body image? Like, what is your relationship with food? Like asking those kinds of questions. And then you could see, okay, hey, somebody was at a 5 and now they're a 1, or vice versa. So that would just be interesting. And that's something that you can do with a case study or case series versus, a larger study with 40 people, because it just gets a little bit dicier. But I loved this. I think it's such a great study. James did an awesome job. And I think it's really valuable for the community because we're getting more information out there. We're getting more research. And like we said, like you can't always extrapolate other studies. Doesn't mean that all studies are bad or wrong, but you also can't always extrapolate one study that you see and think that it's going to fit for every population.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm working on a talk for a conference where I'm developing, and we've actually talked about this the last time we talked, not on a podcast, but it's the mismatch between evidence-based coaches are relying on the literature, which are never bodybuilders. Your bro coaches are relying on their experience only and in bodybuilders and not looking at the literature at all. And I think and again, I know you appreciate this, somewhere in the middle of relying on the evidence to help us develop like guideposts and your experience in the trenches to fine tune what the research is saying. That's where the magic is in terms of a coach.
Yes. And you have to be able to do that. And as cheesy as it sounds, and everybody always says this in the coaching industry, but coaching is an art and a science. And sometimes it's the science that you're relying on. Sometimes it's the art. And particularly the art form comes with communication. And that's a whole different conversation. But coaching is as much of a relationship as it is just having a good basic understanding. But if you don't have the basic understanding, you can have the best relationship with somebody, but you're not getting them results, it doesn't matter. So yeah, the study is published, correct?
The case series study? Yes. Yep. That was published in March and it's freely available. It's
okay. So what is the title?
So if you just do that, well, let me look. I have it's called Physiological, Psychological, and Performance-Related Changes Following Physique Competition, a Case Series. But if you Google these 4 letters, MDPI, that's MDPI, and my name, this will come up. It'll come up probably like number 3 on a Google search.
Perfect. And then you can see all the other research that you guys have done too. So.
Well, the MDPI is the publishing house, so it will bring up this study and our diet refeed study.
Okay.
because
Sweet.
that's very specific to MDPI.
Okay, but those are both good studies, so you guys can check those out. We'll also put it in the show notes for you guys as well. And yeah, anything else you want to add, Dr. Campbell?
I don't think so. I mean, as you said, James did a great job. Something that we had wanted to do was really compare reverse dieting versus a recovery diet where you're trying to gain weight faster.
Yep.
We needed more people, and even people, because we asked them, are you going to do a recovery diet or are you going to do a reverse diet? Regardless of what they said they were going to do, it didn't matter to us. We were just tracking them. But a lot of them didn't do what they said they were planning on doing. Like it was regardless.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm so shocked.
Yeah. So the ones who said they were going to do a reverse diet, go up slowly, didn't. And then those that said, yeah, I'm going to gain weight pretty fast because I want to be a recovery, were more slow in their weight gain. So
yeah, that would certainly be a study that I would love to see, but that would have to be enough people. And because if you're trying to tease out differences between two groups, you need to have enough people. Otherwise, there's just not enough power statistically for it to show really anything. So that would be so cool, because obviously we all have our own personal opinions, but ultimately, again, that's going to come down to the individual, right? Some people can do a stricter reverse. I find that 95% of people can't, but obviously there's always going to be that one person who can. But I definitely veer more towards the recovery side of it, which is, the faster weight gain, and then kind of steady from there. But again, it would be interesting to see what the differences are. So once again, share your Instagram handle, Dr. Campbell.
It is Bill Campbell at Bill Campbell PhD. I almost gave my email.
Yeah.
My Instagram is.
Don't want to do that. Maybe you do, but in case you don't, you can go to his Instagram.
I'm better on Instagram. Bill Campbell PhD.
Perfect. And then if you guys are interested in either the undergrad or the master's program at USF, you can just check out their websites under the exercise science program. And if you guys have any other questions about, coaching or other podcasts or articles or anything that we have on our site, you can go to teamlocofit.com, check it out there. You can also send us an email right through the website. So thank you guys, as always, for joining us, and we'll catch you next time. Thank you so much, Campbell, for coming on again.
Yes, thank you for having me.